give a fuck? Why do I give a fuck? Why do I try so hard? Why do I care so much?
Welcome to Why Do I Give a Fuck? A cross-cultural conversation between myself, Diane Tate,
and Johanna Thompson. In these times of great struggle and possible shift, we ask ourselves,
why do we give a fuck about any of it? How does the lens we see the world through impact what we see?
And what do we do about it?
Hey, hey. How are you?
I'm good. I'm feeling all right. So how are you doing?
I'm good, and I'm kind of digging this new setup that we have here because we get to hear the intro to the show in real time, and I don't normally get to listen to it because I'm doing the post-production and I just kind of stick it in there, but I don't listen to it. So it's kind of fun to listen to it again and get all jacked up.
Yes, because it gives you kind of like this energy. I'm curious, as the folks that are listening and watching us, how you enjoy our intro and outro to our podcast. So
yeah,
we're here. And it was an intentional intro and outro because we wanted to like draw people into things that we're really caring about having conversation about. One of the things that I've been mostly curious about, because I had a really good conversation with a very close friend of mine about faith-based belief about what's socially, politically happening in this moment. And there's specific narratives that come out of the faith-based to kind of like propel some of the understanding of all of this VUCA experience that we're having. And when I say VUCA, I'm explaining that right now we're in like a violent, uncertain, chaotic, and ambiguous time. And so when we're in times like this, where there's so much intensity, where the people are having so much struggle with trying to like find some balance and comfort, where do we turn to? Where are the specific places that we turn to? And a lot of people turn to with their faith bases to pray for something different because they're having so many struggles. And when we do that, we're talking about what you are believing about this time period. I'm curious about that. I'm curious about having that type of a conversation.
Yeah. And I think, just a little bit of a disclaimer, that we're going to have this conversation knowing that maybe some of these faiths that we speak about, we're not necessarily subscribed to ourselves, and that we're maybe third person or third party discussing what we know about some of the beliefs that are out there that people are subscribing to. So we just want to say that we may not know all of the details and all of the ins and outs, but as observers, when you're on the outside looking in, and I know that just a couple of weeks ago there was a lot of talk about the rapture that was supposed to happen, and it didn't, and so that's happened several times over the course of our lifetimes, that that everybody gets all in a tizzy because they think the rapture is coming, and then the date comes and goes and nothing happens, and it's always interesting to me that then it's like, oh, well, really, it's supposed to be this next date, and they find another date to focus on, and makes me throw a little side eye at it a little bit. I'll be honest. I'll say out loud and own my feelings about that. So.
And I just want to help, clarify for people, when we're talking about the rapture, we're talking about the second coming of Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. And that is basically a Christian belief held. It wouldn't match with folks that are of Jewish faith and belief, because Jesus was never the person that was actually considered the Messiah who came true. And so there are folks or people with the Jewish faith base that are still waiting for the rapture or the second coming of the Messiah in the way that they understand it. I have no idea about the Muslim faith base. I just don't know, and I should know. And I think I'm going to find some people to give me some explanation about what that looks like. But the rapture and Jesus not coming. But there are a lot of preparations, and there are a lot of rituals according to the guidebooks that are happening across the world that I understand. There were 3 heifers that were raised in the United States and transferred over to the Holy Land that were sacrificed in ritual to prepare the land for a holy sacred space where a temple can be built up, and that temple is being built up as we speak. And these are some of the things that were written in the book of Revelation, the book of Daniel, and all of these places to like talk about the end times and what we should be prepared preparing for, if you believe that. I'm curious, before we even go into this conversation, do you want to share like what your faith base is, and like what there's conversation about if you are participating robustly with your community of faith believers on what this moment is that we're experiencing?
Yeah. I have a question about what you just talked about, though, and I want to ask it before I forget it. When you said that the cows were raised and they were shipped over to the Holy Land, what land are you talking about?
Jerusalem.
Oh, okay. All right. So Jerusalem.
Yes.
Yeah. Occupied Palestine.
Yes. Occupied Palestine is Jerusalem, Palestine.
Yeah. Okay. I wasn't sure, so I just wanted to ask that before I forgot.
Yes. And I'm saying Jerusalem, and I am saying occupied. I said Jerusalem, occupied Palestine, because when I was having this conversation, the person kept on saying Israel. And I'm like,
yeah,
Palestine. So we went back and forth, and it really did make me have a clear understanding of your perspective will help you to name, but then also, and also as you are coming into the way that you reflect on what your perspective and the stories that you've been told, being able to contextualize who the people were that folks were talking about at that time. And as we're talking about how we qualify time completely differently than the calendars and the time scales that were used back in the day, and putting all of that into sense to be able to have an understanding about what the relevance of what these guidebooks were talking about and preparing us for what we call the end days.
Yeah. Well, it's. I have so many thoughts, but your question to me was, what is my faith base? What is my faith practice, and am I practicing? I declared as a Baha'i, as a member of the Baha'i faith, about 7 years ago, and it's interesting. Somebody was just asking me about this the other day, and they were asking me because I moved up north from living in the South 4 years ago, and have not gotten connected to the Baha'is since I moved up here. And part of the reason is, especially in the last 2 years, the Baha'i holy lands are in Haifa, in occupied Palestine. And the Baha'i faith is such that we have a universal house of justice, which consists of 9 members, 9 humans that have been voted on by the entire Baha'i community across the world to serve in that role at the Universal House of Justice. And this body of folks writes letters, talks about things that are happening to respond to them and be in responsiveness to them. And I have been very frustrated because they have said nothing about what is happening in their backyard. And talking to somebody about, and the Baha'is are very big on love and peace and unity and togetherness and diversity. And, one of the tenets that I love so much when I was first learning about the faith was that if a Baha'i family has a son and a daughter, and they only have enough money to educate one of those children, they are to choose the daughter, because the daughter is going to raise the children of the next generation and is going to, create the home. And so it's more important to educate the daughter. I thought that was really cool. A mindset, and the celebration and honoring of women and women's roles in the family and in the community and all of those things. They are also not very, very strictly based in, we do not get involved in politics. Baha'is are not allowed to, it's frowned upon within the faith community for Baha'is to run for elected office. And such that, like, when Baha'is vote for people to serve on the local spiritual assembly, on your region's spiritual assembly, all the way up to the Universal House of Justice, the elections there are no elections in terms of, there's no electoral process. You don't campaign for yourself. You don't tell anybody you want to be in this post. the people, when you go to vote, you're given a list of Baha'is that are eligible to serve in that role, and you pray on it, and you determine through your prayers who you are going to vote for. So there is no engineering, there is no campaigning. And so the Baha'is don't believe that Baha'is should run for elected office. And so I have been told, when I've investigated and knocked on the door of different Baha'is that I know and said, I don't know why they're not saying anything. This is happening in their backyard. The holy sites are in Haifa. The gardens are, in the same space as the holy sites for Christianity and Muslims and Jews. And so it's like, why aren't they saying anything? And the thing that I always get is, well, it's a political issue and we don't get into politics. But I don't think it's political. It's humanitarian. Yes. So anyway, said all that to say that I have not been engaged with the Baha'is here in my place of living now. And but it's coming up for me more and more that I do want to connect with them because I have one.
Yeah. I mean, but that also speaks to what I brought up before. It's just like we are looking for other things in our world that to help us make sense of this moment, right? Because it's just so hard to grapple with like all of the violence and harm that is occurring. And there's such a desire for those of us who are connected and in tune to be able to figure out how we're going to access places of peace, pieces of like conflict resolution, places where folks can start to build and create the world that we envision that we can all live and exist in. And I feel like I'm a broken record on almost all of our episodes because I don't know what other seeds to be planting in this moment other than really having people have a cultural shift within themselves so that all of the things that they feed into will go towards this new vision of how we can exist, because what we are existing in is not sustainable. And we're seeing it not only on U.S. territory, but across the globe. We are seeing the fabric of all of our social fabrics being eroded completely. And when that happens, and more violence ensued and more loss of life, what is it that we can look at the other end of this time? And so as we're talking about kind of like some of the religious narratives, we are talking about a transitional period where there is going to be a new social construct that is created. And what human looks like, I know we've talked about this in other episodes as well, what human looks like with the integration and infusion of technology and human body as we understand it today, what our stories and our narratives, our origin stories shifting so much, and all of the ways that we are connected and not connected with each other, because you and I are having this conversation that in the past would have had to happen with us in each other's face and then evolved into maybe having a conversation with us on the phone. We could have this conversation now with a piece of technology where we're looking at each other. It feels like how we were in the room, but it's still not the same because you can't see all of what my body is doing in communication with you. You're only seeing what I'm giving you right here. Which
right.
A very small percentage.
It's filtered, right? It's like, I'll show you what I feel up here, but down here I might be, going
you have no idea why I'm going. But yeah, so like as we're turning to this faith-based understanding, or people looking to that as one of the places to find some answers to the conditions that we're existing in today.
Well, and it was interesting when we were talking about this before we started recording. You were breaking down some of the narratives that you've been hearing in the Christian realms about the end times and things, and I related to it. I said, well, I don't think any of it's real, and so I don't know if you want to share like some of those stories or those narratives that are happening right now, or that people that you're talking to are saying are happening right now, and we can talk about, because we also something I've been learning a lot about in the past 2 years is the Zionist belief system, and which is not the same as the Jewish belief system, but it is a form of it's taken from the Judaism and said, we're going to run with this and slather on a really thick layer of supremacy to go with it. So So I'm curious if you want to share some of those things that you were talking about.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. So in the narrative storytelling, we're at a period of time where there were these cows, heifers is what they're called, that were raised very purely in the United States territory, and then they were sent over to to the Holy Land, to Jerusalem, to be sacrificed. And the sacrificing of these heifers in the storybook was to clear the land. And I'm really giving a very limited, basic thing, because I am not a scholar in Christianity or Christian faith-based storytelling. That is my disclaimer to all of the people.
I just want to ask, when you say storybook, do you mean the Bible?
The Bible. I call all of the guidebooks storybooks because
I thought
guidebooks on how to live.
Sure, I knew. Yeah. Okay.
So the Bible, y'all, I call it a storybook because I learned it as a storybook, and I'll go into the history of how I understand my faith-based understanding. But so in these Bible stories, so the heifers are sacrificed. They're clearing the land for a new temple to be erected. The temple is actually being erected at this point in time. Somebody is, architects and developers and finances to make this temple. There also is a Muslim temple in very close proximity to where this large temple is supposed to be built. So there might be some conflict regarding the Muslim temple, which folks of the Christian faith base and those who are building this new temple are wanting to remove the Muslim temple. So we know that that's going to have like some socio-political conflict that's in real time, that's present day, based on some of these storybook information that's what's happening in our end times. And then as this temple is erected, there's supposed to be peace accords that are happening, which we know that this ceasefire is a part of moving into peace treaties, and what the global powers are saying, that they're transitioning into a period of peace outside of the wars that we're experiencing. And with these peace accords, the people who are supposed to be at the head of those are creating spaces to allow the Antichrist to come into and occupy this new temple, because of the way that the peace and the conflicts that are going to occur that come after. And that's supposed to be the tribulations. And the tribulations will happen where folks that have not been taken up in the rapture. I'm watching your face. I'm watching your face as I'm talking this. Okay. So folks who are supposed to be taken up in the rapture.
I have a poker face for any of you that don't know me.
Okay, hold on. We're not laughing at these people's belief or this understanding.
No, you're laughing at me.
I'm laughing at your responsiveness, faith, and as we're talking about it, it can be confusing. Just to note this, so some people of Christian belief and faith will have to experience the tribulations, which is where there's going to be the violence and the unleashing of the demons that we heard about in Revelations, that people are going to experience that level of pain and torture and torment existing in the present consciousness that we hold now, until we get to the place when there's this war between the Antichrist and God. And that's going to be the end of what we understand, the revelation, humanity in the way that it exists today. And I'm adding on that explanation of the end as we understand it. And the reason why I say it in that way is because we have had throughout the history of humankind the end of human as we know humans. So like the humans that lived in an ancient world, or different humans than we are humans today. We live longer, we grow bigger, we eat different food, we have different DNA. It comes from an origin space, but we have evolved in different ways, and we are continuing to evolve with what we have in our environment. So those are some of the narrative storytelling. And what I understood in having this conversation is that the truths of the things that are actually happening, the transfer of these cows, the erecting of a temple, the negotiations to get rid of this other temple, the peace accords and treaties, those are real-time things that are happening in present day reality. And so there is this opportunity for faith-based people to relate it to what is expected to happen in this moment. And this is not new. People are in all generations have done some type of iteration of this process, but we are here now, and it does feel a lot more present and real and relatable to the storytelling that are in the guidebooks that I'm familiar with. So I'm really curious about Zionists, and I'm also curious about your physical responsiveness to the things that I'm saying.
Well, I mean, I grew up in the Episcopal faith, so we didn't talk a lot about end times that I can recall. So I don't know. It's really just things that I've learned in the periphery over the course of my 57 years on the earth. And I was one of those kids that growing up in Sunday school, I always asked questions. I was always like, well, I don't, show me the proof. Show me the proof that this exists. I don't understand. How can you just assume? And so my first thought when you're talking about these stories is that all of these things that you've just related that are happening because humans made them happen. Right? They raised the cows, especially to ship them over to Jerusalem, to have them get all of those things happening were man-made. They were man-decided. They were, and human, I don't mean man, I just mean human, decided. And so it is always interesting to me that people then see these things in succession and go, oh, it's the end times. It's all happening. And it's like, but y'all have been reading the stories all this time, and you made this happen. You raised these cows to do this thing. So to me, if it's going to be supernatural, it's going to come not orchestrated by humankind. It's going to happen by some sort of, oh my God, look at how this is all coming together. And none of us had any control over it. And it's all happening. That to me is a little more, that would make more sense to me in my linear left brain mind to ascribe it to some sort of God connected thing, because it's not necessarily driven by humans. But if humans have read these stories, believe these stories to be true, and then make choices to do things to make those stories actually come into existence, then to me, that's like, ain't that humans doing that? That's not God, right? So,
yeah, okay.
My head.
Don't it?
I don't know. I think we can tell ourselves. So to me, it speaks, like into a larger picture, it speaks into how humans love a story, right? We love a tale of intrigue. We love a cause and effect. We love these things to happen. And I think in a lot of ways, we can also make things happen that can look like they're just of some other entity outside of ourselves, because we want them so darn mad. And there's a lot of talk when you talk about the peace accords, there's a lot of talk about, or there's speculation around why this happened now, and that Trump was supposed to be this arbiter of these peace talks. And a lot of it had to do with the fact he wanted to be nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. And that was all happening just in the past couple of weeks leading up, and so he had an ulterior motive to get this done, right? Because he wanted the Nobel Peace Prize. Now, he did not get nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. The woman that did get nominated is from Venezuela. I don't know her name off the top of my head, so I'm not even going to try to say it. But she is a leader of the opposition party in Venezuela, who, as of this morning, has dedicated her Nobel Peace Prize nomination to Trump, because she believes he should have gotten it more than she should have. So that tells you where her brain is. There are a lot of people that have been heralding her. No, she's not. She's not all that.
And I understood the person who's actually doing the peace treaty work is the son-in-law.
It's Kushner. Yeah, it's Jared Kushner. He's the mouthpiece for who, and he's a Zionist. So he's, you have to understand where his mindset comes from in, the ceasefire And the reason I'm cynical about it is because, I mean, I want it to be, as long as the Palestinians are happy with what's happening right now, then I support them in everything. But in my own, USCN cynical mind, I'm seeing the bigger picture and saying, why are they deciding to not bomb? Now, they did just get the not to get in the weeds, but the Palestinians just gave back, the Hamas just gave back the last remaining alive Israelis. The 20 last hostages have been returned to Israel, and they are now negotiating getting the remains of those that have been killed while they were in custody or as hostages, to return those remains to Israel. Israel's supposed to release thousands of Palestinian hostages that they've been keeping since October 2023 and before that. And they have released some of them, but not all of them. And they're certainly not releasing any ones that they think are going to have any kind of political power once they go back into Palestine. So there's a lot of things to be skeptical about. But it's like when somebody says to me, like my sister said to me not long ago, she's like, how do you know the difference between who's spinning the tail? If the propaganda that the Israelis are putting out and the propaganda that the Palestinians are putting out, or the storytelling, it's not propaganda, it's actual storytelling of what's happening on the ground. If you're looking at both of those things, how do you know which one is spinning the right story? And I told her, I said, the best way to do that I've learned is to look at the power. Who's got the power in the story? If the Israelis have got all the power, which we know they have right now, then the likelihood that theirs is not necessarily accurate and is going to prop up the story that they want to put out there is higher than the Palestinians weaving a story. The Palestinians are not going around bombing themselves so that they can make videos so that they can ask for sympathy. That's just not happening. So anyway, I got into the weeds, but
not into the weeds, because you bring up an important point, is that if you're looking at who the power is and you're looking at the narrative storytelling that folks want to be told to the larger public, you will also see them in actions of like murdering folks that are journalists that actually are telling the honest and true storytelling about what's going on the ground, because you have an example of that.
Yes, I do. So this is a Palestinian journalist, and please forgive me, I've been practicing saying his name, but I don't think I'm going to get it totally right. Salah al-Farwahi.
Maybe
Al-Jafarwari. Yes, my white mouth doesn't like to. I'm still working on my pronunciation, but he was a Palestinian journalist. We have videos of him celebrating the ceasefire with his colleagues and his friends, with his press jacket on. And yesterday he was killed by Israeli militia. So he was not necessarily killed by members of the IOF, which would be the Israeli military, but there are Israeli militia groups that are roaming around the Gaza Strip, and they are the ones that shot him. So he was on a list of journalists to be targeted, and they got him even after the ceasefire was supposed to be enacted. So I want to lift his family up, and want to just shout out Hidden Palestine for this graphic. They had it on my Instagram account, and so I borrowed it to give just a synopsis of who he was. But he was reporting what was happening in Palestine and Gaza the entire 2 years. He lost many family members. And then this morning, before we got on to record this, I saw a video of his brother was just released by the Israelis. He was being held hostage in Israeli prisons. He has been there for years. When he got released, he was looking for his father, and they had a video of him looking for his father, who he had not seen I think he was in prison for 15 years, 15 to 20 years, this young man. And, he and his father both broke down and wept. He knelt at his father's feet because he didn't think he would ever see him again. And his father just buried his brother this morning. So this all happened after the ceasefire. I just want to reiterate that to folks that are listening.
And that's what we need to be cautious about, right? And to
That's cautious. Yeah.
we can't know the stories until we hear the stories from the real people, and until we dig for the stories to hear a more expansive, like not just believing one group and one source of information, but looking for other sources of information where people are having real impact and it's happening to their direct families, so that we can really hear and know what's going on with people across the world.
Yeah, I've gotten so, I guess the word would be cynical or distrusting, or some would say my critical thinking skills have gotten deeper, but I just don't trust any narrative. You know, my fiance was watching a documentary about the Dallas Cowboys, and he was like, it was so interesting, and I learned so much, and I didn't know this much about Jerry Jones, the owner of the, I'm saying owner in quotation marks because I can't stand that they call them owners. It's so plantation, but I was feeling cynical about it. I was like, well, of course it paints him in this wonderful light. Of course it makes the team sound amazing. Of course because they're the ones that organized it, you know? So I'm horrifistory cynical about that.
Are you as cynical about kind of the storytelling that is happening with folks of Zionist belief faiths and like what's happening in this period of time?
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm learning so much. I had no idea. Full disclosure, and I say this readily and with all humility, I had no idea what was happening in Palestine before October 2023. And so I have been on a steep learning curve about what Zionism is and the difference between Zionism and Judaism, and have stood in protest lines with rabbis who are, you know, screaming, this is not Judaism. This is not Judaism, because Judaism has been co-opted by the Zionist belief system. I liken it to, remember after 9/11, when all we kept hearing was Islamic extremists, Islamic extremists. They took the people that hijacked the planes and flew them into the towers, and they dubbed them as Islamic extremists. And I remember unpacking that in my head and thinking, this isn't necessarily Islam. I was listening to people from the Muslim faith, and they were saying, this is not, Islam is a peace-loving faith. It is deeply rooted in peace. And so
just like we say about Christianity, I'm sorry to cut you off, but yes, but then you can have Christians but you can have Christian zealot, and then most Christians will say we are a group of people that are inclusive and of love and care and principles of Jesus. I know it's a harder.
Well, the other reason I push back on that is because, I mean, I grew up in the Christian faith, and so I think they have a really good way of saying that. But then when they're watching a genocide happen for 2 years, they stand on the sidelines and go, well, I can't have an opinion because I don't, you know, you're watching a genocide. Why don't you have an opinion about this? That's not what Jesus would want. You know, Jesus would not be, he would be standing on the ground in Gaza saying, don't bomb these humans. And, you know, they were bombing where he was born. They were bombing Bethlehem on Christmas Day 2 years ago, and Christians were silent. So I don't know. I push back on that.
It's harder to,
yeah, because, and it's not even Christians. There are Christian Zionists. I've been learning about that too. And I'm not even sure that it's Christian Zionists that are silent. I've seen everyday Christians who think that they walk this path of love every day, but then they're silent in the face of ethnic cleansing. And I don't understand that. Maybe you can help me understand it, because to me, they talk about love, but they don't really walk the love walk when the rubber meets the road. So I know
that there's a confusion. For me, what I hold, because I don't understand what other people are thinking about all the time. But for what I hold is that there is a clear distinction about who is claiming Jewish and Israel and claiming what was promised back in biblical storytelling. So I'm talking about like what I consider and understand and know as the original Jew, right? Jesus being one of them, folks from the land that is there and having this faith belief. So you can have a Muslim faith belief, but you can also back then have a Jewish faith belief. And most of those people come out of Egypt and believing in one God, and then that developed into Allah. And then the folks that are claiming that Jewish history now came into the faith out of a war, as I understand it, and I was at a place and a point in a time, and I have to get the dates because I'm not like this, antiquity historian person, but right. I understand that there was a movement because of a war, and then for them to be able to come into the place and be able to settle, they were invited to join this faith beliefs. And so that is kind of the understanding of like the Ashkenazi Jew that came down and took a hold of and that there's a distinction between folks of Jewish faith, between Zionists, between Ashkenazi Jew, in the same way that there's distinctions between the different factions of Christianity. I'm not sure about the Muslim faith base, but this does make me say, because I've said that more than 3 times on this episode, that it would be important to hear from somebody of Muslim faith belief to explain kind of where we are according to the faith in this moment in time. But my understanding of the folks that are holding Israel, that are claiming the promises of the Bible, are not the actual people that those promises were being made to. This is the evolution of people and their belief system over time, and being able, to your point, being able to hold the power and position to make these claims. And that is where there is conflict with my understanding and belief, because I don't believe that the people who are making the claims are the original people who have the right to be making the claims that they're making.
Well, I have a curiosity about something you said about that they joined the faith after the war. I think the Jewish people that, as I understand it, the Jewish people that, they wanted to go settle in other countries. They wanted to get out of the war-torn countries after World War II and after all the horrific things that happened to the Jewish population during World War II. But other countries didn't want them, the U.S. being one of them. That this country did not want Jewish people to come here from Europe. Mm-hmm. So that's why Palestine was taken for those people. That settlement was created because the other countries around the world did not want Jewish people to come to their shores as refugees after the war. I mean, Netanyahu is Polish. So I think what you're saying, what I heard you say was that they joined the faith after the war. And what I think they were already
I'm talking about Ashkenaz, but I'm talking about way before 1940.
Well, they were already Jewish. So that it wasn't about them being part of that faith. It was just they went to that. But if the DNA was run now, I challenge anybody in Israel, if you're listening, and Occupy Palestine,
it's a big challenge.
Let's do a challenge.
Walk on with this challenge.
All of you to get your DNA tested. And if the majority of you actually belong to the DNA, what I think you're speaking into, the genetic code of the original Israelites, then we can have another conversation. But the studies that I've seen and the statistics that I've seen are that, upwards of 80 to 90% of the people that live in Israel right now are not anywhere genetically related to the original people that were supposed to be given that land.
The space. Mm-hmm.
And it's been Palestine for thousands of years. So, all of that narrative is just to justify the occupation and the settlement of that land because they were so oppressed. And so to me, that's the difference between Zionism and Judaism, because Zionism says we are owed this land, we were promised this land, and we're going to take it by any means necessary. And the Palestinians need to go because they're filthy. And so, so that's different. That's very different than Judaism. So as I understand it, not a Jew. So I'm not speaking from any kind of scholarly place, but that's what I understand.
And I was speaking more to what I understand and know of the history of the Ashkenazi Jews, because where I went to undergrad, we got to have a lot of wonderful conversations about
you did.
Because it was, when I was there, it was like maybe about 90% of people of Jewish faith who went to school with me. And so I made a lot of really good relationships, had a lot of good food that was made in the Jewish tradition and culture, tasted delicious, but got to have a lot of conversations about it. And so what I understand the distinction about the Ashkenazi Jews way, way, way before we're talking about, I would have to look it up, like centuries, like 10th century, 13th century, or that kind of thing, where you formulated a language, and because of migration and because of whatever the wars were happening, folks coming out of Turkey and Poland and having more whiter hues, developing a language, a Yiddish language, and then creating their communities so that when it was a time that folks didn't want this population of humans to be in their areas, and 1942 came along, you had a whole migration of people into Palestine to occupy it in that way, but coming from a different type of Yiddish Jewish tradition than the original tradition. And so if we're thinking about all of those things, when that is the foundation of what is the excuse for why somebody should be able to occupy a land, I'm asking people who are of the particular faith belief right now to make a determination, or to be reflective, not a determination, but to be reflective about who is asking for this land, and the methodology with which they are asking for this land does not, for me, align with Christian values, and or with what I understand as the storytelling of Jewish history, and who is supposed to inherit what, where.
Right. And just the emphasis in Judaism of atonement and understanding harm that you might create to others, and taking responsibility for that, and choosing to stop perpetrating that harm. All of those things, we've seen just, not adhere to at all over the past 2 years. And so it's very clear to me that it's not actually based in true Judaism, what they've been telling themselves, the stories that they've been telling themselves, to say that it's okay to do what they're doing. But then what's so curious to me is the Christian Zionism. So and I know we could go on and on now, but we've already gone.
And it's fine.
Yeah, the Christian Zionism story is that, that when that land is purely Israel, meaning all other people that do not subscribe to the Israeli faith, the Jewish faith, the Zionist faith, really, have been driven out of the land, then the second coming will happen. This is something, and I know I'm talking out of my butt. I only know a peripheral bit of this story, but that Christian Zionists are almost more rabid about this than Jewish Zionists, because they want the second coming of Christ to happen. And they believe that that's only going to happen when Israel owns all of that land, when Palestine is no longer, and when there are no more Palestinians on the land. So to effect their ultimate, here comes Christ again, they have to drive the Palestinians out and be okay with that, which is like, what are you talking about? Jesus,
that was why I wanted to have this conversation, because the socio-political climate is really driven, and you can really see how religion is used to control the minds of the masses, to actually have the type of political and power grabs that have existed throughout the history. But we're just being able to talk about it in real time because of the present day experience that we are witnessing across the globe. And if people are really, really, really committed to their faith beliefs, and all of these different intersecting faith beliefs are focused on one land mass to like hold the foundations and the root of like what is expected for this time.
And justifying the killing of hundreds of thousands of people for a land grab. I mean, it is.
We learned it in history. It is baffling, but we learned it in history.
It's not a new thing at all. But it just, to watch it in real time is what is just,
it's hard. And it's like, not to glorify it. And like, if we're visioning, I always want to be like very Afrofuturistic about like what the new thing looks like. It looks like when we're in schools, not glorifying who conquered who and who subjugated who, and make that like that is the standard of how we're supposed to be existing. But let's tell stories and histories of people who have reinvented communities that have found different ways of existing amongst one another. That is what's critical for us to be doing as we're thinking about what it is that we want to live in and exist in the future. Yeah.
Well, from our lips to everybody else's ears, maybe. I don't know, but this has been a really great conversation. And, I don't know what the answers are.
Except your answer is keep the faith, but also be, hold on. Keep the faith, but also be interested and curious about how other people are understanding their faiths, because that's what we need to be doing, is understanding how people are thinking and how they're coming to their understanding so that we can offer different ways of thinking about it. Yeah. Okay. I will take that with me. I promise. Right. You don't have to, but I was just a suggestion. No, I think it's a good suggestion. All right.
Thanks for joining us. Until next time, as you move throughout your day, continue to ask yourself,
Why Do I Give a Fuck is produced in collaboration with Johanna and Diane. Music by Norwegian musician Water. See you next time.